This is Sabjon 2. I'm doing a Sombre Warhammer mod tier list using the tier list on Lucid server, and then I'm going to explain why some of the choices are where they are. It's a community tier list, so it started with sort of single player values, and then members of the community chimed in, and the tier list got moved around to where it is. These are, although mostly with the framing set by me, some of these are not necessarily where I would put them personally, but in any event, this is the community tier list, and we're going to go over the strengths and weaknesses of each nation, why they fall, where they fall, and we're going to start with the weakest and go up. I would have the tier list up on the side, but the long and short of it is I am not good with OBS, so yes, it's going to be like this. So let's get started. We'll start with the weakest nation in the mod, the Hobgoblin Khanate. The Hobgoblin Khanate is terrible. I think they've got a few, no, I don't have summons. So the Hobgoblin Khanate basically has a few gimmicks to make it good and bad. So it's got some fairly bad infantry all the way up. You have limited numbers of decent infantry. You have the bad troll. You have a couple of mercenaries, which are alright, nothing special. And really the gimmick of the nation is you have this fairly mediocre cap-only sacred. It's stealthy, which is nice, but it's not that great a sacred. It's just, stat-wise it's okay, it's stealthy, it's got high map move, it costs quite a lot, it's not exceptional. But you've got your, I think it's the Wolf Riders, no, the Rear Guards. These guys, they get 40 experience, will turn into a sacred. And these are foreign recruits. These are the only units that turn into a sacred from foreign recruits in the game. It is an exceptionally strong mechanic. These are stealthy, they're quite good for the cost. They're very resource and RP heavy, so you can never get as many of them as you want. But functionally, if there is some OP broken mechanic, it's probably around promoting a whole bunch of these into sacreds. And then suddenly, of course, all your foreign recruits and all your regular recruitment essentially is sacred recruitment. So you have this huge blob of sacreds. Otherwise, they have a mechanic that gives them essentially a Khorne, which is incredibly powerful and does actually a lightning bolt every turn, but when it dies, you basically lose the game on the spot. And finally, you've got your, I think it's bad researchers generally, and if I recall, you've also got the Great Shaman, which is mildly interesting. It's cap only, but this guy, he looks like a thug. He's stealthy, he has huge map move, he has built-in reindig, he has all the built-in thug toys, but the issue, and he's got obviously thugging paths, the issue is you need to do a bit of research behind him before he sort of can start doing the most fun stuff. You know, give him some gear, give him a bit of research, and by the time you get to that point, the hobgoblins are often run over. The other thing is, of course, a thug bless is not the same as a bless for all your sacreds, so this guy's often in conflict when you're setting up your bless. So if you're going really lopsided on the front end, your bless doesn't really help your sacreds. If you're just making a bunch of rear guards, you've not much of bless. If you're using an awake, if you go for a dawn for imprisoned, you may have a much more powerful bless, but that bless is liable to be things like unholy weapons or the like, which are not as powerful on a thug. So the hobgoblins, basically their resource points are too expensive, there's nothing too exciting about them. They are the weakest nation at the moment, and they are by a margin, particularly because there's no obvious thing to do with them. Kislev is currently noted as the second weakest. It may be stronger than its races. It's one of the ones that I've got a big question mark next to. It's what I would call an unsolved nation. So Kislev gets bear summons, which is basically a version of Rus that gets its summons at Conch 2. It gets a few Knights Versen, it gets a few Sacreds, which is solid. The Wagoners aren't exceptional, the Flyers aren't great. I think they're just regular lances actually, sorry, just regular horses and mixed-up nations. Your Legionaries aren't great, they're fine, they're unexceptional. You have Dwarf Warriors, which are a few good pieces of infantry, which is nice as an anchor. But overall, your rank infantry is sort of, it costs quite a lot of our resources and RP compared to other things in the mod. You have this Warrior 2 Mage, and you have a few like national tone down falling frost spells basically, which aren't bad. Most of your mages are moderately lowish in path. I think the idea of this one is you cast Moss Body. The idea of this one, of the Glamour one, is it lets you cast Gamma Bluffs, and this guy just lets you, he's your slow recruit, and he's pretty bad for a slow recruit because he only got 5 paths. The most interesting units are the Kossar, the Heavy Kossar, and the Streltsy. These units essentially have decent melee stats, weapons, and powerful bows. And Streltsy has like a drop bow, so one shot and then goes into combat. And the reason these units are really interesting is they can obviously hold a line longer than regular units, which means you can set them up to take lots and lots and lots of buffs. Your paths are a bit thin for doing that. It is technically possible, but then you need a range, like a huge range of mages. Essentially, everything's a bit awkward at the mention. There might be some really powerful bless over the warbears, although it's like discount Rus. There might be some really clever way of using the Evo spell for timing attack, and there might be some really clever way of using the alt buffs to essentially make a line of these stay in position and just wreck your opponent's formation. I don't think anyone has solved them yet, so they remain very low tier, and none of the tools are exceptionally strong. They're all a bit expensive and clunky, but they sort of remain possible to break. Tilea is the next slot up. Tilea is arguably weaker than Kislev, but if there is something broken in the other mechanics. But in any event, Tilea's big gimmick is it's got these contracts. So you've got mercenary contracts which don't cost many resources and essentially give you a small plot of armies. College mage contracts which give you random empire mages. They will, but you pay too much for them basically. Bits and pieces, units, there's nothing too exciting here. And some very interesting mages. So these guys are actually pretty great. They have great research, good paths. You don't get to choose where they get up to 2 in. 1/4 is astral. And essentially the problem with these is their lowish path. And this guy's usually random too. And because you can't plan where your researchers hit 2, it's very hard to make these guys efficient beyond about Alt 3. We just do a random wave of buffs. And beyond that, your troops are fairly unexciting. You've got pretty bad pikemen, you've got some pretty mediocre swordsmen. The Dwarf Warriors always carry. The freelancers are actually pretty good. They recently got nerfed. They're still fairly cheap for what they are. They're not great. They just have a lot of procs. Most units in this range have like 19, 18 prot, and these guys have 21, 20. But the freelancers are pretty good. The Midian would be good in regular dominions. Armor values are a little bit higher in this mod, which makes this considerably weaker. So that's really it for the roster. There's nothing too exciting. The big gimmick is you get your regiment to renowned by your mercenaries, so you get to make more stuff, but you get a little bit of extra gold. It's definitely fine. There's nothing. The issue is it falls off really hard around the mage core. Like in theory, you can do some fun stuff with the infantry and playing around, but the mages just don't keep up with the rest of the things in the mods, and your infantry is not especially strong. It's just numerous. And it's only numerous really early. It's not gold cheap. It's not especially efficient on the gold side of things, even if you can, quasi get double resources with merc contracts. So it's just not great. The next one is Brettonia, which has a giant teardrop next to it because Brettonia is one that a lot of people want to be great and just isn't. So Brettonia has a whole bunch of mechanics that almost work. Entreat Duke, well, Dukes vary in strength. Some are good, some are bad. And this essentially summons a second blob of army, a second expansion party, or a mini party. You have a bunch of terrible infantry, and these are all just garbagey. You have a couple of cavalry, and these, if I recall, have like medium armor, 18 prot, 20 movement. They're solid enough for expansion. They don't hit that hard, they're not great, they're fine. If I recall, the mounts have quite a lot less defense, so they get hit quite easily. Like they have decent prot, but they're just not. They die pretty easily. They're not that tanky. Things hit hard in this mod. They don't hit that hard themselves. They hit moderately hard, but there's a lot of armor in this mod, so they tend to underperform. And then you've got your mages, and if I recall, you've got the Grail Mage, which is basically a research mage, and not a very good one. Grail Damsel, which is it's a rainbow buffer, but nothing particularly high path, and it's just you're paying 300 for what's essentially going to be a light buffer. She's overpriced for what she does. She does have 16 map move. In theory, she can be thugged out if you give her enough protection, because she has map move, she has all the toys, but it's just expensive, and this nation doesn't really benefit from thug bless. Grail Prophetess is good, but expensive as heck. Dukes, it's sorted collections of them. Not going to get into them, but they're essentially cavalry and a bunch of stuff. Some are sacred, some are different gimmicks, but they're not incredibly efficient. It's not like you're paying 550 and getting 1,000 worth of it. You're getting, roughly gold efficiency. The Pegasus Knight is fantastic, but he just costs a lot. It's a lot of gold, a lot of resources, a lot of RP, and it's really hard to mass enough of them in the early game to be relevant. So in theory, kind of mid-game and late game, this guy's a fantastic raiding unit. It's also hindered by the fact that the commander for them, the Pegasus Lord, costs 2 CPs and a lot of resources. So it's just hard to get anything going. The toys that you want to work, the Shepherdesses, the sheets aren't good enough, unfortunately. I think it comes in with a bunch of random sheep. It has free spawn. The sheep are terrible. You want it to be good. It isn't. Maybe you can make some siege chaff line work of it. I haven't seen anything that's been useful. The Battle Reliquary, in theory, can solo expand and do some weird gimmicky tricks, but that requires a very heavy bless, and it's just... It does fight forever. It does have a lot of hit points. It's not bad, but it's hard to be good enough. And it feels like when you're using this unit, you're working really hard to make it not that good. So that's the biggest problem with the Battle Reliquary. There's nothing innately terrible about it, and it is sacred, and it is blessed, and it's gone berserk. It's got toys going, but it's not that exciting. And its gimmick is it summons 5 sacreds, and then a bunch of randoms. And then you've got the sacreds. The Grail Knights are very good sacreds. I'm not going to get into it too much. It hits hard, it moves fast, it costs an arm and a leg, particularly in gold. But this is a solid sacred, definitely worthy of bless, definitely decent. And this isn't any tile sacred, and it's kind of terrible. Now you can bless this guy very heavily to make him good enough, but the issue is if you're putting that much into the bless, there are better nations to put that much into the bless for. So, and finally Brettonia has some free spawn and some upgrade mechanics, but the ratios at the moment are very low, so they kind of don't work. So that's it for the D tier nations. The problem is Brettonia doesn't really know what to lean into. If it leans really hard into scales, it just doesn't really have the mage core or the late game to carry that through. So you can't really go for these scales builds. If you go into the Hellbless, there are better nations carrying the Hellbless. And if you go for the free spawn, there isn't that much. So Brettonia feels like it's permanently caught between 2 or 3 places, and it's just never good enough. So that's it for the D tier. I don't think there are any S tier builds. There might be one for Kislev where someone cracks it, but the D tier is there because most of the other nations outpace them in some way or another, or at least theoretically outpace them. We're going to go to bottomless C tier now. We're going to start with Beastlands at the bottom of C tier. Interesting little nation. Beastlands has a couple of really powerful gimmicks. I don't think anyone's ever cracked it fully, but it could potentially be overpowered, which is the reason I put it in C, not B. So Beastlands doesn't get forts. When it goes to forts, it raises them. I think when it goes to temples, raises them and puts its own temples up sometimes when it takes down forts. And it has essentially, in return for that, you get really cheap, really good infantry. You get Bestigors, which is 15 gold, 17 prot, low resources, great damage, just fantastic units with armor. You have the unarmored versions, which are still really good infantry, really cheap, Gauls and things like that. I don't think they make Ungors too often. They're stealthy raiders, I think they're pretty bad. They do stealth, but they're just not that good. You get a little bit of free spawn sacred, not enough to make a difference. Centigals are gold expensive, but they are fantastic. You just spam these out whenever you've got to pay gold. And these guys, they berserk, they stealth, they raise. You make people like a living hell with these. Charioteers, they're fine. They don't have that much prots. They die pretty easily. The issue is just 70 gold. It is a way to spend your gold, but the question is often, do you want charioteers or do you want centigals? And centigals are just great. It's usually centigals. I'll go back to the mountain minerals in a second. Regular Chaos Warhounds, they're not that. These are bad ones. You have Giants, which can help with expansion. They're very squishy, these ones, but obviously Giants are Giants. They have fear, they have AoE attacks, and the way you use Giants, just because we're doing this from scratch and I haven't explained this yet, is you put them behind a line of other troops. So the other troops essentially make connection and take the aggro of the opposing forces. So the attacks are focused on that unit. And the Giant essentially wades in from the back and doesn't take any hits, and then it has huge damage drops AoE, because they essentially have a bunch of area effect attacks and multiple of them. So essentially it walks in, and so that's got AoE 1, AoE 2, AoE 2, regular. So if you say AoE 1 is roughly, I can never figure out. I can never remember the AoE numbers, but just to say these guys hit like an absolute freight train. They have fear. They're great for cracking through hard tiles like heavy infantry. They're a very useful thing to have in the arsenal. These are quite gold expensive. They aren't cheap. You can misplay and put them, too far forward and they walk up and die, but they're very handy to have. The breakout unit is the Minotaur. It's any forest. You can spam these like crazy. It's a good sacred. It berserks. It hits like a truck. It's got decent amount of HP, decent size, decent prot, especially when you add berserk bonus into it. And it carries a bless really, really, really well. So the question is, what bless do you want on this guy? That's one of the huge questions of the nation. Or do you lean to the Scales troops? In my opinion, if you're going to take a big bless on Beastlands, the biggest question is, do you have to have a plan for breaking through gates? Because you can have a giant ball of sacred, but if you can't get through the gate, the whole thing's pointless. That being said, lots of interesting blesses here. Vamp weapons, ethereal, just straight strength, scales in prison, larger. Lots and lots of interesting toys you can look at, but you have to have a plan for that gate. You can try and do that via magic, but as Beastlands, that's one of the big hindrances. You sort of run up to people and you win the fight, and then you get sort of stuck at the fort. And in terms of mages, you just have some regular commanders here, Centaur Stealthy. The Brave Shaman is one of the most unique units in Dominions. The reason for that is, although it requires a forest and a lab, it only requires 1 RP. And that's because of the Beastman blowing up all forts. But that has the effect that if you make a forest and a lab, you essentially get regular mage recruitment. So that's out of Palisades, as opposed to even the other foreign mage nations which have 2 RP on their thing, so this doubles the rate of them. So in theory, these guys let you go absolutely gangbusters on research, because you put a forest in every tile, you put up a lab in the temple, and then suddenly just making Brave Shamans everywhere. And they're all researchers, they have decent paths, and that's in theory completely cracked if you can find a way to break these, just because you can make more of them than almost anything else. Beast Lords give you some leadership. There's nothing complicated here. Doom Balls are basically raiders. They're not self-blessed, they're just gear versions. And the Great Grey Shaman is a little bit of magic diversity, which is always welcome because you really lack magic diversity on Beastmen. And these essentially transform into wonderful Chaos versions. So Beastmen stay in C tier because nobody's quite cracked them yet, I don't think. But they've got a lot of really powerful tools to compensate for the fact they don't get forts and they burn the forts down. And it is possible that those tools are sufficient just because you get such efficiency. Your troops are really efficient, your Scales troops are great, you have unlimited sacreds basically as much as your gold allows, and you can really push into research. Now the reality is you can probably only do 2 or 3 of these things, you probably can't do them all in one build, but there's enough powerful toys there that Beastmen have potential again to shoot up the tier list as people break them. We're now going to go of Middenheim, Nuln, and Altdorf. I'm just going to skim through these because they're all roughly the same. I think I've got Nuln at the top, Altdorf could be at the top. Basically, these are human nations with human troops. The head infantry is the greatsword, very cheap, resource expensive, high damage. Essentially, the human nations are kind of inefficient. There's nothing wrong with them, but there's nothing too dramatically powerful about them. And once you get past the human nations, most of the nations have some sort of draw or power up or glow up, which the humans don't. The Celestial Wizards on, I think it's not Middenheim, it's on Altdorf, are very cheap, so you get some good research. You get a lot of 2x mages, and like a spread of them. And one of the gimmicks is you get these tributes to the knights, so you get to summon knight orders, and then you can put those knights in your capitals. So you can have your capitals punching out like these moderately powerful order knights. Let me see if we can get one up. That's the pledges. Oh, Dwarf knightly orders, there we go. So you get like these knights, they're not actually that powerful. Like none of these are, none of these you go, oh my god, I've got this knight, it's now going to change my entire build. They're all fine. Now one of them's sacred, the Grandmasters are all thugs, they're all pretty good, but most of these knights across all 3 human nations just aren't good enough to make you fall in love with the nations. And otherwise they're kind of, you've got otherwise pretty bad infantry, and the nations are just a little underwhelming. Like, there are toys that they get, but that's the reason that the humans sort of are lower. They don't really have a huge draw. Now we get to the Orc nations, which I believe are under-tiered. They've been placed here because of the community. And I've protested a couple of times to this, but I don't dispute the general rating of this. Like, I understand why people put them where they are. So, Orcs essentially have some fairly dirty research mages and some wonky pathing on them. There's two different shades of them. I've put Black Crag above Bone Nose, but they're pretty similar. So you get some different coloured mages. Your better mage has like a restriction on it. This is Capital and Forest Forts. The upper is, I think, Cave, Mountain, Highlands, which is much easier. You have like a diverse mage, which is this guy. So you've got two diverse-ish mages. Bunch of infantry variations. I'm not going to get into all of them now. I'm just going to go ahead and say they're mostly low protection. The Bone Nose has Invul, and Black Crag has Prot, and they're kind of like low resource, low RP. Sorry, Biggins cost more, but for the regular boys and the regular stuff, it's like low resource, low RP, low gold, spammable, but they have a big attack. So they're not exceptional, but you can make a lot of these, and a lot of, we'll get into that in a second. And the Biggins are essentially stronger versions. They are considerably stronger, but they cost more, and they actually cost resources and RP, and you have to build them in the forts. And there's fun toys you can do from the forts. You've got giants again, you've got trolls again. Different ones have different trolls. The biggest gimmick that the Orcs have that put them in C tier, and this is really the draw to the Orcs, is the Orc Boy. So the Orcs, sorry, there's three. The first is the Orcs have this promotion mechanic. So goblins, which can be recorded outside forts, and Orc bosses all promote. And when the commanders promote, they give you about triple their gold times the promotion level. So let's say if you have an Orc boss promote to Orc boss level 2, that gives you roughly 150 gold worth of troops, and he promotes. Level 3 is going to be what? 50 times 2, so about 300 gold worth of troops, and he promotes. And then forts for 50, and he gets a big power up. And each time you promote, you get a bit of leadership and a bit of power ups, and it's very nice. And you can spam out these goblin bosses too from anywhere tile, and then once they get to 25 experience, they'll get about 100 gold worth of goblin troops, which are pretty bad. Nobody's going to say goblin troops are good, but the point is you can have them sort of track behind an army, and if the goblins track behind an army, it's a very nice way to get them stuff, basically. Because they track behind the army, they get a bunch of experience, they then get all these stuff when they level up, and then you send them off to raid. The gimmick, as I was saying, on the shtick is the Orc Boys. And I think the Savage Orc Boys are similar. Yeah, less resources, less RP. Basically, the way these work is because you can make so many of these, if you have an Awake Expander and you take a couple tiles early, you can just turbo your expansion to a ridiculous level. And rather than building infrastructure, you can spend every inch of gold you have on Orc Boys indefinitely. And that gives you a very, very scary early game. And that is the biggest gimmick of the greenskins. Your ability to go essentially expander, take a tile, make orcs from that tile, use those orcs to take another tile, and like by turn 6 or so your expansion's done. You have several hundred orcs floating around in all your tiles. You started focusing on mages. You've got probably 30, 40 goblin commanders from all your tiles because you're recruiting every turn, just accruing experience, and you're looking to run someone over. The reason that the Black Crag is higher is they've got better uses for their resources when they put forts up in Black Orcs. Their mages, the Night Goblin Great Shaman, is just the first one is fort. This is caves, highlands, mountains, and capital. It's just easy to recruit. Stone trolls, which are occasionally useful, are easy to recruit, and yeah, that's the draw. I don't really think the Night Goblins are that much of a draw. The Black Orc Big Boss is a big deal because he gives you a leadership boss and he upgrades very cleanly. So I just think this is a slightly cleaner kit on Black Crag than Bone Nose, although Bone Nose has a any fort sacred, and that's its gimmick. I just don't think you particularly want to be imprisoned as the Orcs, which is why I lean towards Black Crag being the preferable one. Goldtooth, and that's because they have the snowballing mechanics. So Goldtooth is interesting because it's been up and down a bit. Goldtooth has a very interesting magic tree, and it has this like blood tiered magic tree. So if we look at blood as all these various powerful spells, game resistances, yeah, regen. It's essentially dragging a bunch of magic from other trees into blood. You don't need much research. It does powerful things. It's essentially alteration buffs and enchantment buffs. You have Dying Dominion, so you've got Midland Dominion. You have some interesting stuff. You've got Giants, which is always nice. And you have essentially a pretty varied and powerful troop roster. At clerical level, pretty low procs, but they're all high damage, low procs. They're interesting. You have a Sacred that's got Berserker Free, so it's actually got more proc than it looks. This thing is expensive, but you can really push the best on this and just make them really scary. I think it's a little overrated. A lot of people swear by them. It's a good Sacred. You have the Tyrants that upgrade when you put them in the army. They're pretty hard to kill, so as long as you're careful with them, you should be able to upgrade one or two in expansion. Problem is they're 2 RP. And in terms of big gimmicks, otherwise, you've got these Wreck Anywhere, 25 gold, low resource, low RP that hit hard. I don't particularly love these, but the biggest over the Orcs, just because the Orcs hit about that hard in their first attack, because they've got like a charge bonus. But these guys do hit hard, these are strong, they have a lot of HP, and they have 16 map move, and 16 map move is a big deal. Because it often means you can move from 2 tiles away, and it means organising your armies is pretty easy. In the Mage Core, you have a couple of big gimmick things. So the ET Shaman, which is Mountains and Highlands and Cap, just this big rainbow buff Shaman. Research is okay, but it's 4 RP. Slaughter Masters are great. You get a free Blood Mage. Yeah, this is your go-to mage. You get an automatic 3 blood. He blood hunts. He has blood adept sacrifice, so he gives you more dominion. And you have the Butcher, which is just a lower version of that. So some people go very hard into the Hellblast because you've got Dying Dominion. So you just make a bunch of pit fighters and go absolutely crazy. The other option is pretty much go in the opposite direction. Don't use Dying Dominion as much, and essentially try and get a good start, make a bunch of recruitments, and try and use the strength for your faster research, because you're only on 1 tree. Your research is kind of terrible. If you actually look at them, I guess the 5 value is okay, you can get them to like 9, but your research is terrible in this nation, and what most players try and do, as far as I know, is they essentially try and line up one person very early in the game, grab a bunch of Sacred, do a bunch of troops, and they try and snowball that into them. And that the blood start's very good for doing that. Let's move on to Vampira. So Vampira has been nerfed because I believe it was the false god. Was it Cookies, I think? Someone posted a Vampira build that a few people have been speculating about beforehand, and they used it in a big multiplayer game. And although it got knocked over eventually by a build that seems to counter it, it was very, very effective, and it turned out the scythe was not built as intended. It was essentially using the wrong weapon tooltip and was completely overpowered. So the problem with Vampira basically is it's jack of all trades, master of none. Essentially, it's not got the greatest scales troops, it's not got the greatest... It's got a lot of interesting thug things come the mid-game if you get there, but the problem is getting there. And most of its lines are fine, but not that powerful. I'm not going to get into each one of them, there's just too much stuff to get into without doing a detailed review. The most powerful individual unit is the Harvester. The Harvester almost carries the nation on its back, and for a while it was near the top of B tier, base gives back this one unit alone. It's been nerfed, it's still incredibly powerful, high map move, massive damage, massive attack skill, accepts almost any kind of bless. Heck, you don't bless it and you still recruit this as just a troop, which in my opinion makes the next arc the obvious starting one. But the Carstines essentially suffer from the jack of all trades, master of none, except they have great thugs, but the thugs come online too late to really allow the nation to be a high tier. That's it for the C tier. Just briefly on the C tier, Beastlands tends to like a dormant because it really likes its blessers. You can go awake on it too, you can go in prison, you can take almost anything. Nuln, Altdorf, and Middenheim, I don't think they lean into their sacreds very hard. I haven't seen any great sacred builds on them, but that doesn't mean they can't do other things. Bone-Nose and Black Crab, I like Awake. In theory, on Bone-Nose you can go like Imprisoned and go for a big Rainbow Bless. Black Crag, I'm pretty sure, just wants Awake all the time. And Expander allows you to do some really exponential things. Goldtooth tends towards Dormant or Helvest. It can be awake Helvest, but Goldtooth tends to want as much in its best as it can, because it really wants that first war just to knock out that first opponent, get those extra forts, get those extra resources, and try and push the research and the bloodline into another, and just keep rolling players over. And Vampira is, I think you typically go Dormant because you can just fit some nasty blessers there. So we're going to go now into the B tier. I think Vampira can go awake as well if you take the scales builds. Vampira can do a lot of stuff. That's not fair. So we're going to go to the B tier. I think there is a notable jump between B tier and C tier. So we're going to start with the lowest, which is Athel Lorien, which is very much a placeholder slot because it's a hard nation to evaluate. So Athel Lorien is doing, I think, very well in the big multiplayer, in one of the big multiplayer games at the moment. Essentially, Athel Lorien has really strong troops in forests. The troops get knocked down a notch outside of forests and instant fort building in forests. So it's a bit like Pangaea. The difference is you get some really nice recruitables, so like these guys, not the War Dancers, they're pretty bad. The Wildwood Rangers have a pretty strong weapon. You've got some decent infantry, they're not exceptional. You've got high defense units just coming everywhere, and you've got glamour units everywhere, which are really handy just because it means fighting. I think they will lose them outside forests, but inside forests they just don't like that fights. So you make sure your big fights are in forests. You've got Warhawk Riders, which are raiders / siege strength. You have a couple of interesting sacreds. The biggest, and you have a few variants of our troops. The biggest thing the nation lacks is a way to punch through high armor units. But that being said, people will thought of all sorts of creative solutions for that. And you still have the Wildwood Ranger, which is passable. I won't say it's good against those high prot units, but it's, it's useful. And then you've got a good mix of commanders. You've got the flying thing, which carries the Warhawks as well. You have the Shadow Dancers. I don't think these are good enough. They cast, I think, at the start of battle once, Awakened Tattoos. It's hard to get to hit the right things. I think it needs a buff or a change, as is. But in theory, they can work. I think I was hearing chat about some people using War Dancers to expand. That doesn't make much sense to me, but they've got high defense, they've got 2 weapons. Just gold expensive for what they do. Spell Slingers are, I think they're fine from recollection. Yeah, there's rainbows. There's nothing exceptional about them, they're okay. You have cap-only thugs. I hesitate to call these super combatants because, well, they have a lot of HP, and you give them regen, so they're healing like 8 HP a turn. They've got 13 procs. They're not. I think they've got blunt and pierce resistant too, and I think the resistances really add in, so they end up being much tankier than they look. But at the end of the day, they're still 80 HP thugs. There's still a lot of high damage things in the mod. They're best for gate defense. You put them on a gate and they're basically indestructible in a lot of circumstances. But they can get surrounded and die by a lot of things on the map. Well, obviously in forest these things are pretty hard to kill. Extra prot, unsurroundable, extra HP, strength, glamour, recuperation. You can just see how these things are strong in forests. And I would say these somewhere between light thug and light super combatant, depending on the circumstances, but they can do a lot of interesting things. And there's 2 variants of them, obviously the small and the big one. I think the High Weaver is just a good Rainbow Mage. So what you get is you get a decent amount of diversity, you have some powerful instant fort mechanics, and these, you don't have to use gems for these, this is just you throw gold with it and solve the problem. And you have some really good troops, just a slight problem with heavy infantry. And it's every possibility that this stealth kit and this leapfrogging style rewards high skill, and that's why I hesitate with its current ranking at the bottom of B tier. It could be it deserves better, could be it deserves worse, but it is what it is. So Nagashizzar, very interesting elimination. So Nagashizzar was OP for a while. I understand it's been nerfed as the iterations have come. It used to be you could make a million small casts and they're just too good. So it's now 2 per turn, and this is not enough. So Nagashizzar has a bunch of good summons, a bunch of good troops, a bunch of good scales things, sort of a jack of all trades. If I recall, it's still got some problems with heavy infantry. It's not catastrophic problems, it's just not the greatest. Yeah, 3 types of Graveguard, if I recall, they've added a new one recently. I don't know, it doesn't matter. The really interesting thing about this nation You've got necromancers and summons and bits and pieces. You can expand very fast. You have good sacreds. One of the interesting things about this nation is you have these like 4 gold souls, and they cost low resources, very low RP, and the same goes for long dead, 6 gold falls, 4 RP. You actually don't have enough commanders to pick up and collect all of these. It's one of the gripes I have with the mod, because it's a noob trap in that you basically want to be permanently summoning long dead horsemen to pick up all your various things with a necromancer. And if you don't know that and you're new to the game, you might not make enough. Essentially, you can make a ton of these from every province, and as it turns out, massing troops is a really good way to win games. And Nagashizzar has good sacreds. It's only got one type of magic, but it's got a lot of generally strong traits. I'm going to move on to Nehekara. And Nehekara has got fairly weak sacreds. It's got like this very diverse toolkit, and that's the reason it's higher in the tier list. I'm not going to dwell on it too long. Essentially, it's got a Tomb Herald, which is very unique in that it doesn't require a temple, and it's a sacred recruitable commander. And this got nerfed in response to a bunch of us in the chat saying, hey, let's do something really dumb with this commander and use it as a troop. Because, some of these Dominion players, myself included, are crazy like that. But Nehekara has always been fairly strong. It's always had a good set of summons. I think it's got some unique divine spells. Yes, and it's got some powerful unique spells. This is generally strong. The biggest problem is being Dominion reliant. It very much slows down the start of the nation. It pushes you towards an awake, and it can result in some very awkward turns. We're going to now move on to Zharr-Naggrund and Naggarond, which have a lot of similarities. So although they're very different nations, they both have this slave mechanic, which basically says if you throw N troops at a tile, you'll get a bunch of bonus slaves and a bunch of bonus gold. And as far as I can tell, you want to be abusing the hell out of that. Slaves can get you more slaves. The units running combat don't actually have to fight. My understanding is what they count is the first commander's grouping. The reason that matters is you don't want to spread units out too many commanders to do weird fancy expansion nonsense, because it won't count them towards the troops. It also leans you towards, I think, using the better commanders with high leadership. So, Zharr-Naggrund first, good troop roster, you got powerful troops. If you take a fortress, you get powerful new troops, and they're all good. The biggest problem that you have a slave mechanic, so you can build millions and millions and millions of slaves. They're a bit resource heavy, but you can get resources in this nation. You have 2 sacreds, cap only. This guy has an ARP attack. He's pretty mediocre unless you stack strength, in which case you get, if you get plus 10 strength, that's 2 19 damage ARP attacks per sacred. And this is just a really solid general purpose sacred. You have low diversity in your mages, and they're all pretty expensive. And that's kind of the biggest weakness in the nation, the thing that's holding it back. And I guess this guy is 6 RP, but you start with Citadel, you get tons of troops, you get slaves, you can mass stuff out, you get giants, and basically you can snowball very aggressively from that Citadel out with that slave mechanic. You have 2 or 3 snowball mechanics. The slave mechanic also gets you, I think, some blood, so you basically have for a free break into blood, into fairly deep into blood, and you can just go absolutely crazy with that. So this is what I would call a snowball nation, because you sort of your mages just aren't good enough for the cost that you are going to run out of steam if you're not permanently snowballing. But if you are permanently snowballing, you have a lot of very powerful tools. And with regards to that, you really want to get good at expansion, because you want to be sending a whole bunch of cheap, worthless units behind your expansion parties to trigger these slave gathering mechanics, to give you more slaves, to give your capital more resources and more gold, etc., etc., etc. And that process just chains on forever. And if you have a friendly ally, you can really misbehave for that. So now we have Naggarond, which is very similar. Well, Naggarond has sailing, it has the same slave mechanics, you want that same sort of snowballing and that same sort of buying slaves. I think the slaves were a little weak on it, but it's not a huge deal. You have a bunch of good troops on this nation. If I recall, your mages are a little awkward. Yeah, Astral Death is fine, but it's awkward in the early and mid game. And you've got basically Astral Death as your main pair path, and he's got a random, he's cheap, and he's a researcher. You have a ton of sailing, which is handy. You can misbehave. You have this auto-berserking sacred, which is hidden around here somewhere, which is kind of bad unless you punch a bunch of bless points into it. And I think the game encourages you to... Where is he? I can't see it. I've lost him. Oh, he's here. Which elf? The issue is the poison blades. The strong poison doesn't really synergize with 14 damage. So you need to bless... So when you order blessing, it goes up to 17. But it's hard to make a bless that makes these guys really, really good. These are any forts, so they're very handy. But they require a pretty heavy bless, and there's another heavy bless nation higher on the tier list. But the Witch Elves are a very interesting little unit, with an interesting set of mages, an interesting set of cultists. You have good troops and efficient troops, which is really handy. These are expansion troops, and they're great. I think you have a stealth pack. Of course, there's none of these swimming units. I feel like there's a stealth unit somewhere in here. Dark Elf has a really good package. It's actually, I would say, Naggarond, Zharr-Naggrund, arguably a tier above Nehekara and Nagashizzar. They're held back not by any particular individual trait, it's just the nations above them, in my opinion, are stronger. I think Naggarond is a strong nation with lots of fun tools. You then have Ulthuan, which has been S tier in the past, and it's shuffled around. I'm personally considering raising it higher, but expansion in this nation is complicated as all hell. So basically you have this huge roster of mages and troops that are very basic description. Your troops usually have one mechanic good, the rest of the mechanics bad. So these guys defend really well and can't kill for beams. These guys have really good bows, and that's it. These guys have really good shields. You have good cavalry, but they're fairly expensive. I think the cheaper cavalry are the best ones, like the middling ones, but they're expensive, particularly resource expensive. Like 71's a huge amount, and they don't hit that hard. Most of your troops don't hit too hard as the elves. I think the Swordmaster has 21 damage, which is alright. In Highland Forts, you get the White Line of Trace, which is fantastic, and I think you want to... It's good enough that you want to look for those Highland Mountain Forts, because that's going to solve some of your problems. The Sacred is underwhelming. You can put some BP into it, it's not great. And you have some Chariots, which are fine. And the Eagle Claw gives you a Ballista, which I don't think anyone's cracked yet. In theory, it could be good. I think it's overpriced. The biggest thing on the mages is you start with the elves. You start with the Citadel. You pay you pay half upkeep on most of your unit, which is nice. And so your research goes absolutely through the roof, because you've got this little researcher, which is essentially 13 research, because you always take magic 3. And you have access to a 2RP 3 fire mage, and this guy 2RP. Sorry, this guy. So you just have these absolutely fantastic mages. You have some really good spells. Basically, you're trying to compensate for the fact that your troop lineup it's not bad, but it struggles against heavy armor. It struggles in few locations. And you have a giant rush me target on your head. So my suspicion on the elves is you have to awake. You can, in theory, I don't think there's any point taking Dormant Blast really on the elves. The safeties aren't good enough. You could, I guess you could in theory take like a Dormant Unholy, but you pretend it's not really set up for that, and I'll go over the reasons why I don't think it's a good idea. You could take an Imprisoned Scales build. You can go full Scales in the nation. The problem is you are such a tempting target early on. Your starting Citadel really wants to clear its cap circle as quickly as possible, is to get your troops rolling and get your extra forts up as quickly as you can to get past that nasty early game. And the truth of the matter is, so many of your mages, I know all these cap only, but you've got so many good mages that he's not mage. I guess it's just those two really. He's spamming out the Hoaf and Stormweaver and the other one. But your mages are good enough that I think you just want to get into that mage game as quickly as you can. Your troops are, from recollection, they're fairly gold expensive. They're not resource and RP cheap, so you're not going to mass them like other nations. Your cheap stuff isn't cheap. He's still 20 gold. He's 20 gold. I think this guy's 25. Like, nothing you have in your roster is going to be light in your gold. So you really need to get that extra gold at the start just to compensate for that. I think an expander is heavily rewarded in this nation, because it gets you out of your weak early game. It gets you into producing your stronger troops, which in turn is going to turbocharge your expansion. Because it also means instead of making these crummy things, you rapidly shift into like Swordmasters and Knights, which is going to make everything faster. And the point of that is once you get past expansion, you then start getting your forts down and you start punching out these powerful mages. Ulthuan may be underrated, it may be overrated. It's a weird nation. It's typically seen as rush bait. I think people typically take it as a full scale imprisoned, and I think that's a mistake. I'm pretty sure this nation just needs to get out of the other game quickly, so it needs an awake. It's unfortunate, but you have enough scaling mechanics on this nation for your powerful mages that you just need to get past that weak spot. We're going to now go to Cathay, which is one tier above. Cathay was bordering S tier earlier on, before it got slightly nerfed. Essentially, it used to be you got Iron Body Monks many tiles, and these guys did great. And they both got nerfed and made cap only. So yeah, we already know these guys are great. You have a fairly wide infantry roster that's fairly unexciting. There's nothing wrong with them, they're just unexciting. I think J Tolkien's actually pretty good. No, that's not fair. I would say you have a fairly wide, pretty good infantry roster. That's a better way of looking at it. You have these like Wagoneers, which are these huge range damage shots that do well against like these stacked, dense formations. Couple of, every time you make a fort, if it's coastal you get a bonus, Highland Mountains, Forest, and these are all like above average troops. And then you have your mages, which is like you've got this range of n equals 2 mages, so you get to choose where your research goes, which is nice. You get this guy, he's alright, he's 11 researcher. We saw the 15 one earlier in Tilea, which is this guy's obviously cheaper, but the 15 one's obviously 15. So he's slow to recruit, but you start with a Citadel, and this guy is slow to recruit. You start with Citadel, and he's basically a built-in thug. You don't need much research for this guy to start moving around and causing absolute chaos, and that's really the job. And I note the Logma has flying, which means he just flies around and wrecks everything. These guys are really hard to pin down, they're really annoying, they're really effective. So Cathay's limited in its ranking, mostly because its mages have been restricted, and I quite like the way that Sombre's done this, but essentially that's what keeps Cathay from going higher on the tier list. They get some free gold as well as one of their mechanics. Really strong nation. Yeah. Skavenblight. Skaven is a very much rush or die nation. They've got a few different paths. I'm not going to get into all 4 of them, but the basic idea of Skaven is this. When you build a fort, you can type it to one of 4 different types. Essentially, there are 2 ways you can build Skaven, really reliant on sacreds and everything else. If you use everything else, you essentially use those extra forts to make A-tier troops. If you're reliant on sacreds, you can use them to make sacreds. And essentially your infantry list is really weak. Your rat ogres are good. You have some limited recruitment things, the warp fires and doomsdays, which are useful, but they're not exceptional. You have the council guard, which is unexceptional. Your troops are worse than they look. Their morale is low, their protection is low, they're unshielded for the most part, they die and they have low attack. Please understand, as Skaven, your troops are like paper, they are going to die like crazy, they're going to rout like crazy. So, the biggest unique unit you have, the whole thing's stealth, all the troops stealth though, so you get to choose your fights and you get to misbehave in all sorts of ways. You have really good researchers, just insanely good research, and on top of really good researchers, you have, I think, forge bonuses and great cap onlys, great summons, great, you have a bunch of unique magic spells that are essentially more powerful evocations and other bits and pieces, so really strong magic roster, and this little guy. Census Sparer is broadly a draw to the nation. High map move. He's got Berserker 4, he automatically berserks when you bless him. Stealths, gives out a poison cloud which debuffs everyone. It's actually bad enough if you don't give him some poison so he can poison himself. And this guy hits twice against shields, and it's a 2-handed, so it scales with strength, so it's automatically +4, and it's actually +5 damage because it's a 2-handed weapon. So you're already hitting at 23 without the plus. You always want +1 strength, because that +1 strength is going to essentially give you +2 damage per attack, because it gives you a rounding number of 4. So you're going to want some sort of rounded value of strength, but obviously +1 just gives you +4 attack, +4 damage per hit per sacred. It's huge. Do it. The core bless that this guy takes is Skaven tends to go imprisoned, tends to go enchanted blood, and Undying 5, just to get these guys to a more respectable HP total. And then the builds vary from sort of that point. You have the rainbow builds, you have the strength focus builds, you have the resist focus builds, you have the defense focus builds. I'm not going to get into all of them, but a lot of those builds focus on making this guy really strong. The other builds focus on essentially scales, using the troops really well, and then you've got a bunch of like weird troops floating around that are just much better that you get from going into the other tribes. So really powerful nation, really powerful spread of things it can do. I like the caveat expansion is complicated in this nation. Lots of fancy stuff you can do, lots of complicated tricks, but it's not easy. Basically, the rat ogres are kings in expansion, and the fact that they only require 1 resource is an absolute lifesaver. Sends roughly 10 at a time, plus other troops. 10 rat ogres plus troops is going to be enough in most tiles. Some people like to do 15, but I find that just too slow. But 5 is probably too few for most toys, unless you're doing, turn 2 expansion, in which case you send your 5, and then next time you send your 10, and you do weird split stuff. So that's it for the Skavenblight. It's pretty high up on the B tier. It's possible it should be an A tier. My understanding is it has a lot of wins and posts good results. So we're going to go now into the Chaos roster. So this is where it gets more powerful. Khorne. So very briefly, I just want to go into something that needs to be mentioned if you're going to Chaos. The aspiring champions, because they're size 3, want 2 size 3 bodyguards, so you fill up the tile. That makes them considerably better in expansion. Because these guys have promotion and experience reliant, you always want them on the front line fighting. You always want to have a few bodyguards that aren't going to die, and the point is you just want them accruing experience and upgrading as quickly as you can. So Khorne basically has incredibly powerful infantry. They hit incredibly hard. The berserkers hit hard, the marauders hit hard, your sacreds hit like a truck. Don't forget these guys have berserks, they actually hit for 24 per axe, and they accept a bless really well. So you just run at people with this nation. It's actually not that complicated. There is questions as to what's the best way to handle the bless. I think you always want magic 2 because you have no functional research on the nation whatsoever. This guy's your best researcher at 8, which is depressing. He's non-sacred. This guy has 1 research. He carries a bless though. He's all right. I believe it's the forge. There's a forge unit that automatically 2 RP, but he automatically goes into berserk in combat. So you can't really bless him up. His job is to stay home and forge. You send him into combat, he's going to go in, not cast any spells, and be completely useless. Don't send this guy into combat. He's a forger. You got Speaker of Brass, which is 4 RP. He's too much. So the problem is your mages are terrible. Your troops are fantastic. You run at people. You get free blood slaves everywhere for being Khorne. So you have essentially semi-unlimited blood slaves. But essentially what your job as Khorne is get these sacred online as quickly as possible, run them at someone, kill that person. And you can argue awake or dormant, you can argue what the strongest bless is, but Khorne's game plan is pretty linear and pretty powerful, and I would argue gets a notch stronger once you get used to leveling up the aspiring champions. I think the Chaos Trolls are undisciplined on this one, yeah. So it's just worth also knowing Chaos Trolls are a really powerful expansion if you know how to position them. Essentially what you want is you want them to be in a group ideally of 5. You fill the group up with like marauders or something like that, just so you don't get morale hits. So add like 4 or 5 marauder hunters to fill out 2 of these. And they just hit really hard and just add to your general DPS, so they're worth having in combat. We now move on to the next one, which is Slaanesh. Slaanesh has essentially, I think it reduces unrest in all its tiles from its dominion. Yeah, it increases enemies. So it has these chosen warriors, which are unfortunately a bit awkward, because they have 8 encumbrance. So these are the only shielded ones. In theory, say for defense bless, they have too much encumbrance for that. It's the biggest problem with this Chaos Nation. Chaos is all pretty strong, is they're awkward. If I recall, their command promotions aren't the best. Their aspiring champion is not a mage. It's just not that exciting until you get to the last level. You have interesting magic paths. You have seduction, but nobody has cracked that yet. You get reduced research if you take productivity, which you pretty much want on Chaos, and I'm pretty sure there's no way around that on this nation. It's just the extra troops are so good. Maybe there's some way to do it and cut productivity and go sloth. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe there's some sort of solution build. Again, I haven't seen it yet. You have good sorcerers. As you can see, in theory, philosopher, they can get up to really high research. In practice, unlikely. And if you want to go research, there are other nations. you've got all of them have these like shamans. The shamans are alright. It's just the best way of describing this nation is everything plays a little too awkwardly. There's nothing wrong with them, but you could argue Slaanesh actually falls a few tiers and could even be beneath Cathay or so. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they don't quite line up. Now we're going to go to the A tier, and so that's it for the B tier. Slaanesh and Khorne. Slaanesh can take any sort of build. I think it's usually taken in prison. People think, oh, that's got a shield, high defense, let's go defense less. But the high encumbrance really kicks into that. Skavenblight tends to be imprisoned, sometimes imprisoned Rainbow. Cathay tends to be imprisoned. Khorne tends to be dormant or awake, usually dormant. High elves, I think, are usually built imprisoned. I think they should be built awake, personal opinion. Naggarond and Zharr-Naggrund, huge versus opinion here, lots of different ways you can build them. Naggarond needs quite a lot to make it sacred good, so if you're going to rely on the sacred, which I think you should, you go imprisoned. But beyond that, lots of interesting builds. I lean towards stuff that makes your early game stronger, away from resists. So, yep. Nehekara, I think takes awake for the early Dominion spread most of the time. Nagashizzar, lots of interesting builds. I like awakes, but I just like awakes generally. But I think Nagashizzar really benefits from just starting to spam out those long ago early. It gives you essentially troops on all the tiles. They're stronger than they look. Getting a million of them is really, really easy for not much gold. And the awakes lets you start deathing the world very, very quickly. And after Lorien, I think, tends to go imprisoned for Rainbow Bless. Usually try and compensate in some way for its... It's still got some tools against high prot units, but I think Athel Lorien usually wants to compensate a little bit for that weakness in its Bless. Or it just essentially avoids the problem, avoids those nations, and then waits till it gets big and deals with them by, higher research and things like that. So the A tier. Nurgle. Nurgle has recently been nerfed heavily in the tier list, I think unfairly, but it is at the bottom of A tier. So Nurgle is, in my opinion, an awake or dormant nation. It gets a blood sacrifice on its on its sacreds. And the reason the blood sacrifice is relevant is they get a starting blood income. So if you think of it this way, if you start blood sacrificing for your prophet turn 2, you have by turn 4 +6 Dominion spread on top of what the other nations would have. If you have an awake that's doing 3 checks a turn as well, you can potentially have +12 Dominion on turn 4. Plus 3, 6, 9. So you've got +9 in spread by turn 4, +15. So you have +15 over a competent nation. And if you're preaching, then not potentially +16 dom spread chances by turn 4. So I think Nurgle likes an awake very much. You can go imprisoned and dormant. There are lots of interesting builds. You have the worst of the Night Sacreds. Most of the other nations have good Night Sacreds you can do stuff with. This guy's just got the Plague Toad just dies. It's good fun. It's an interesting unit, but it just dies too easily. It's still good though. It still has the Swallow, which just kills stuff outright. Well, it doesn't kill it outright, but it gets out of combat. They're very expensive to recruit, but you can get them indirectly via Chaos Knights. But interestingly, these cost 80, these only cost 110, they're actually not that different in cost. Amusingly though, these guys are much tankier than the other ones, so sometimes you want the Chaos Knights over the Chosen Knight, which is, I find amusing. So Nurgle has a unique marauder in that they are resource heavy, gold cheap. I should have mentioned the others. I think Slaanesh is fairly standard, and Khorne's is high in damage, otherwise basically regular. This guy is high, so these marauders are high in resources but higher in HP. So basically in the first 4 or 5 turns they're worse, after that they become better. Other than that, you've just got a generally decent troop roster. Bile Trolls are complicated to use in expansion. To put it simply, because the I believe the Spit Bile is range 9. In short, you want to put them in with melee troops so they don't use Spit Bile, so they just run into melee. These are fantastic trolls, but they are fiddly. And if you muck them up, they tend to run in and die or be completely useless. You have a bunch of interesting troops. You have S tier heroes, they all spread plagues. When you get forts up, you spread plagues. And all the Chaos Nations can summon Demon Princes when they get enough Conjuration or Blood. You get the best blood, in my opinion, other than Khorne, out of the Demon Princes in this nation. But the difference is, although you have a really good blood income and a really good source of blood in the late game, you also have the best Demon Prince to convert that blood into value. So you just have this really powerful late game and mid game. You have to get through the early game as Nurgle, and Nurgle has some trouble doing that transition. So I think you tend towards either a Blessed that helps you with the early game, or that makes you absolutely terrifying in the early mid game. A few ways you can do it. I know a lot of people like taking a Blessed that really is focused on the Chosen Warriors. I don't think these guys are that good. I think that's a mistake. I think they have really high attack and they have decent prot, but it doesn't hit that hard. Their stats aren't that fantastic. The map move is kind of mid. In my eyes, and these guys look great, but you don't get that many of them. In my eyes, there are lots of scary things you can do with Blessers, but I think you go Awake or Dormants to handle your early mid-game transition. If you get to the mid to late game as Nurgle, you are going to be very powerful. And that's because you have some fantastic summons, you have, better than anyone else, and your ability to convert Blood Slaves into Demon Princes is absolutely incredible. You have the fabled Death Nature path, and what this basically means is you can cast Relief and Rigor Mortis, so mid-game fights are going to lean in your direction a lot of the time. You can create all sorts of toys with your Marauder Shamans. It's just and you have Plagues, which are basically free spawn come in mid-game. So basically Nurgle gets a whole bunch, and it gives you 3 gems. So you get a whole bunch of and you get, one last thing, you have some of the best heroes in the game because they give you free spawn fights that gives you more gems. So Nurgle is just really generically powerful in a bunch of places, marred by a slightly weak and awkward early game. But if you practice expansion really hard, if you focus on making these aspiring champions, you can usually double expand turn 2 as Nurgle. If you can get used to double expanding, even ignoring your Awake Pretender, so if you can end up taking an average of like 4 of your 5 cap circles by turn 2, by the start of turn 3, then Nurgle's just a completely different nation. Because once you start expanding well as Nurgle, you get out of that early game weak period very quickly and become very strong. As you can tell, it's a personal favourite. We're going to move past it now because I'll just go on Nurgle forever otherwise. Now onto the dwarves. Love the dwarves, lots of ways to build them. So you get a bunch of unique spells, a bunch of unique summons. Your cap essentially will create unique summons coming in mid-game. Very basically, your troops are gold efficient, resource inefficient. That is the simplest, quickest way to describe them. You have things that give you resource bonuses. Your mages are genuinely quite inefficient. Making forts is quite inefficient. But your troops are, because they're gold efficient, you have these really scary troop balls. You have an Any Fort Sacred, which is actually remarkably good for an Any Fort Sacred. You have a Cap Only Sacred, which is extraordinary. You have the Doom Seek, which is Any Fort, which I like, most people hate. You can do some really weird shit with it. You can do some really weird nonsense with that unit. And basically your entire infantry roster is relevant. You've got a bunch of luck independent heroes. I think that increases the chances generally of heroes, because I think it's a % chance roll for each one of them. And yeah, essentially you just got this really strong toolkit. You have strong mages, strong unique spells, really good infantry, and your infantry accepts lots and lots and lots of different buffs as well. I'm pretty sure that most builds go in prisons on the dwarves just because your sacreds accept buffs so well. A few different directions you can go. You can go rainbow resists, you can go defense stacking, you can go strength stacking, which is the one that I like, because if you take like +8 strength from Blood Surge or something nonsensical like that, these guys suddenly end up killing like, I think it's 5 units per turn per unit, and it gets crazy fast. But that's just my personal crazy build. There's lots of ways you can build these, generally imprisoned. Because you have the drain ignore thing, it means drain them at +2, and I think you ignore drain because you're drain immune. It means you can. Because you're drain immune, it means you've essentially got a few more scales than most other players to play with. And yeah, you just have this really strong infantry, really strong mages, really strong unique spells, and really strong summons. The caveat being your forts cost you an absolute ton, so you prefer to take infrastructure or hire someone else to build it for you, and it can take a little bit to get going. But when you get going, the point is because they're gold efficient, not resource efficient, All the outside fort ones you just spam, and you have this really strong ball of stuff. So yeah, that's dwarves in a nutshell. You can go on dwarves for ages. There's lots of real subtleties to them, but that's essentially how dwarves work. You have some of the best infantry in the game. You have great summons. You have great unique spells. Yeah. Tzeentch has a few ways it can build. I'm actually going to show you a build for this just because, although there's a bunch of interesting builds, you can just go full scales imprisoned. And the problem is, unless you're deciding to go awake, it's very hard to see what best changes better than a scale, because basically every time you swap a BP in this build, and I've mapped it out for a while, it ends up costing you a scale, and it turns out you often just better off just pushing the scales to the limits. Tzeentch has a few very unique mechanics going about it. So firstly, you have great researches. You have your gates mechanic, which is very clever, which is get more dominion, essentially you unlock the gates. It's not good enough. If Sombre is listening or watching this, it just doesn't do anything. It's themic, it's fun, the destruction labs is fantastic, everyone loves the way it plays, it just isn't strong enough to do anything, a bit like Brettonia's mechanics. But the nation has enough other things to carry it. Your Chaos Trolls have, knowledge, so they actually can think, unlike the other trolls, so they're easy to micro. You have Chosen Warriors, which have Cast Fire, which is armor piercing, so they scale really hard for strength. So these guys are actually deceptively good. Same goes for the Chaos Knights, because they have the Skull Search, which again is damage, which scales with strength variable. And stuff that scales with strength is just really, you just have this really high damage on these units. And other than that, you have incredible research, so incredible rainbow mages for site searching. So yeah, these guys research like crazy. You always have free magic. These guys site search like crazy. You always have incredible magic. I suppose mine's actually looking at the numbers. Tilea's research is actually pretty strong. The other gimmick you have, not to be underestimated, is this. Aspiring champions convert into a mage. So if you can get 6 to 8 inspiring champions during expansion and upgrade them, which is tricky but doable if you practice your expansion enough, you can often have +6 mages at the end of expansion. Now, if you just spent that time recruiting mages, you wouldn't be expanding as well, and on top of that, you'd have half the number of mages. So even though you lose 20%, you're actually going to be up in mages at the end of expansion if you're careful with these guys, which is just a really nice trick to have. And that's including if you just go hell scales and full scale. That has nothing to do with scales, that has to do with just knowing how to use the expiring champions carefully. But if you can get a few of these leveled up in expansion, it just, again, it lifts the nation by giving you a bunch of these. And if you ever upgrade these, and you can take your research around that, those guys upgrade into this, who is extraordinarily powerful. He's flying, he's map move 20, he's got good paths to thugging, he's just an absolute nightmare. And the point is, it's not too hard to upgrade the other ones. So yeah, you have great research, great ways to turn that research into power, great troops, good sacred, and a semi-broken start with the aspiring champions turning into a bunch of exalted heroes. Biggest weaknesses of this nation are you don't have particularly high paths in any particular area, so in theory players can just run at you. I think having a bit of strength really makes that hard because these guys just hit like freight trains, but it is the risk that players just run at you if you play a Tzeentch, because other players are going to start much faster than you. But in return you get full scales, and if you survive you'll be very, very, very powerful. You can do other things. So I will just note this briefly. On Chaos, one of the fun things you can do is, in the base game, there aren't as many heavy sacreds as there are in the mod, particularly on the commander side. So you can take blessers like Obfuscate, Windwalker, Larger, which don't actually require you to cast Blessing, that just mean you get essentially +8 map moves and stealth on everything on the map there. So if you survive the early game, you become an absolute nightmare to fight against, because you become not just an elf player, you have heavy infantry elfing, which is essentially a unique mechanic to this mod, and I find very amusing. Now you can do that with just Obfuscate, obviously, without going through the extra hoops, but the Obfuscate Windwalker means everything the Chaos player turns into essentially bans, which is, to me, hilarious. And that you can do pretty much dormant on all the Chaos nations. Next nation is Norsca. I understand they're getting hit by the Nerf Hammer soon, which is a pity because they got hit by the Nerf Hammer already, and I love them, but they deserve it. So Norsca has a few mechanics going for it. It's got these powerful swamp recruits, regular chosen, which are just good sacreds. These guys hit like trucks, and it's always nice to have a sacred that hits like a truck just to break through certain problems. Mammoths, which are okay, bunch of troops. Importantly, these troops, when they get promoted, don't lose their experience. And essentially promote from Norscan warriors into Norscan Huskarls, and these promote into sacreds. And importantly, because these don't lose their experience, they keep moving on towards it, and these upgrade at 60, which it's quite hard to get to 60 from scratch. But if you think of it this way, if these guys, when you get the other Huskarls and they upgrade, you'll be halfway there when they upgrade. So that's really what they are. Norscan Reavers are insanely powerful. 24 damage battle axe. They're a little gold expensive. They hit like absolute monsters. They upgrade like the others at 50 experience, but it's hard to get them there because they die pretty easily. But these guys are just great. And you can make lots of them for the low resources. These guys are the best Javeliner of all the various Javelin units because they have a net, which is incredibly powerful. And, the Tzeentch Warhound has... I should mention, all the Warhounds are basically worthless. Some of them have minds so they can think. The problem is they have so much HP, which you'd think was a good thing. But because they've got low prot, length 0, high HP, when they start to die, they HP route you. So I discount these from all reviews. You have just really good infantry, particularly via the Reavers. Everything has sailing. Notably, your any tile commander upgrades into a sacred. So if you can recruit these anywhere and keep them fighting, he will turn into a sacred commander. You have kind of bad mages. Your shamans and your volvers are alright, but that's all they are. And you're always fiddling around with that. Finally, you have summons. So you have Ravenstruck, Bearstruck, Wolfstruck, and basically they're all fantastic. Bearstruck are a little overpowered at the moment, and a lot of builds based around the fact that you can spam out those sacreds at Conj 3. So you just take a Hellbless, use really good troops to expand really well at the start, and then hit some sort of dormant Hellbless or imprisoned Hellbless or whatever, or what have you, and those huge stacks of sacreds, which are probably too efficient at the moment, just win the game. You take a second capital, I think there's a second troop. I haven't actually looked into that too much. It's just chaos. So you get a sacred chaos warrior. That's nice, you get more sacreds at second capital. But Norsca is a very, very, very powerful early nation. Don't underestimate the raw strength of Scales troops. They're great. You also have one of the best heroes in the game, which is I think one has the warship. Yes, it's the Eternal Challenger. So I think he's like turn 12 onwards, and he gives you a flying ship, which is just incredible in the early mid-game. Gives you this huge disco advantage, and yeah. So Norsca is incredibly powerful. It's held back by its magic weaknesses. It's possible Norsca should drop low in the tier list because of its magical problems, but Norsca's troops really carry the day. We're going to go to the last nation, which is a well-deserved first place, which is Itza. And I know people want Itza to be the strongest nation. It deserves a nerf. I am sorry, it is a little overpowered. So Itza has... essentially, you can ignore these 5 units. They are stealthy. Their gimmick is they can stealth and be used to do things. They don't really do that much damage. In theory, you can use these to raid. I wouldn't worry too much about them. You have some great infantry. Decent prot, decent defense, decent stats. They just walk over in these. They're not too expensive. They're great. PvP, a little bit worse. They don't do too much damage, but these are like anti-indies, fantastic. Skink Cavalry, 2 little damage. You ignore this, never recruited. Is he stealthy maybe? Oh, he's stealthy, so you misplaced stealth. Alright. Pterodon Rider. Looks good, isn't. Needs a buff. Pterodon Rider is just a trap unit. People have tried to make it work. I think it's been nerfed a couple of times. It's just not good at the moment. Proxygores. Fantastic. 30 damage Great Club. These guys just walk through heavy infantry, and it shows. And they have 30 HP as well, which is more than you'd think, and 17 prot for 2 resources. Usually, you build these smaller swamps that you get, and you build a bunch of them come mid-game. In the early game, they're not the greatest expansion troops, but my god, they are powerful against their armies, because they just walk through units that otherwise are indestructible. Swords Cavalry, these guys have cost 8 resources, the cold ones have 14 prot, they have a bunch of defense. These expand fantastically. basically you can spend your expansion just non-stop building these in the cap, and you will expand better than probably every other nation in the game, even if you're imprisoned. They're that good. Maybe they don't hit player armies that well, they bounce off player troops decently, but they are an incredible expansion troop. They're ridiculously efficient, mass them, you'll be happy. Ripperdactyls. Extraordinary troop in expansion against PvP. It's subtle because it's not immediately obvious. Essentially, you get 4 attacks, all decent damage, and this is armor piercing. 15 damage armor piercing. That's a big deal. And it has Berserker, so it does more damage, which is a big deal. It's got 19 HP, decent deal. It's got enough defense that it matters a little bit. These guys, however good you think they are, they're probably better. They look okay, they play fantastically. Basically, Ripperdactyls are fantastic, and whenever you get the Highland Mountain, you want to spam these guys out. Razordons and Salamanders are basically like these niche use units you can create from the forts. Not getting too much. Stegodon Riders, another niche use. Temple Guard. Any fort sacred once you've got the right commander there. These guys are the right commanders. We go a bit further on, and you get the other commanders. You've got 40 gold commanders that have 20 map move. These guys allow you to ferry your expansion parties out very far. They allow you to put your raiding parties far. The fact your commanders are 20 map move means you are extraordinarily fast and versatile in responding to threats. Finally, you've got a Blood Mage, which is a little researcher with some blood. You have a Researcher Mage. He's all a Communion Slave, which can be a bad thing if you have a Communion Leader in the army, but he researches well again. He's got stealth, he's fine, he's fairly cheap, and he's got decent paths. You have these, which are the slow recruit ones. They sight search fantastically and they enable safe recruitment. They cost a lot of gold, 920 and 115, but they're great. And Skink Shamans, which are just 90 gold. Yeah, 6 research. They don't research that well. In forests and swamps, they don't need a temple. And honestly, the ability to make a bunch of mages is always handy. It's an exceptional roster. You also have summons at Conch 5 that are essentially powerful blobs of sacreds, not Conch 5, but all the various 5s in research. When you get your multi-heroes, you get Slans. So your random luck heroes are better than most nations. Your multi-heroes are pretty mediocre, but they come with troops. This nation is respectfully a little overpushed. Their forts do cost more to make, but basically you can do whatever you want. Their starting army is good enough to blind expand turn 1, and I think it should. My leaning goes this nation wants imprisoned. It's not because you can't do things awake and dormant. You can go extraordinarily fast, but your expansion is so fast already and that you don't really need the awake to kickstart it. And you really benefit because you have all those sacreds and that huge sacred access. Having that big bless is just really rewarding. The question being, do you want to do that dormant or imprisoned? I lean towards imprisoned, just because it gives you better scales. Now, lots of different builds you can build. I've tested a whole bunch of things, as you can see. To me, the most obnoxious thing you can do in this nation is just +4 strength on your sacred, so they punch through all hard to kill things, mountain survival, and then just a ton of scales. And as it turns out, you are then incredibly rich, incredibly good at expanding, and if someone tries to throw their sacreds at you, you're hopefully just going to damage your way through them with your Croxials and your own sacreds. It's not exactly an exciting build, but there's a million builds you can do with Itza. So that's really it for the core of the tier list. I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping matters. So Itza definitely deserves the top spot. The Chaos Nations expand, so very briefly, the Chaos Nations expands very well if you use the Spirings, 2 Marauders bodyguarding the Spirings, and then say 2 to 3 Trolls with a bunch of troops behind. That can expand into like a light force into Dominion, so like 40-50 tribe, 40-50 militia with heavy infantry last. So you actually can expand very light with these. You get 4 of these. You don't need much at all to expand. With 2 guards each, you can expand into quite a lot, especially with a few trolls behind. And upgrading these really does make the nation's stats just better. Other than that, you've got your giants, which are in all sorts of nations, and I'll just go over them again. Essentially, giants are waiting units, and I'll go over trolls too. So troll positioning, you always want the trolls behind so they come in second. and you usually want to put some troops with them so they don't immediately rout. Giants, obviously if you can get 6 trolls that solves the problem, but often you can't, so you often want to do like 3 trolls and 3 of something else. Giants, there we go, Beastlands. So giants, essentially you want waiting behind the infantry, and you want them to connect just after the infantry. So the enemy units are focusing on the regular units, the giants walk in, do their damage, and rout the enemy quickly before they do much damage. And they do best with like line holder infantry. And the last couple of notes are prot is very high in this mod, generally speaking. So that means units that do low amounts of damage are generally a little bit weaker. And yeah, simply having access to a high damage unit, I guess, makes your nation better. Is there anything obvious that I've missed? I'm sure I've missed a million things, but that's a rough ending of the tier list and why things are where they are. Thanks for listening.